Hello, I'm Lugatorix and welcome to my Seleucid faction guide for Rome Total War. Today we're going to be discussing the different units, some campaign strategy and the buildings for the Seleucid campaign. And yeah, it's one of the most difficult campaigns in my opinion, if not the most difficult, particularly at the beginning anyway. I'd say starting off the Seleucids I would say the most difficult campaign. They start off in this grey region here. It's not very visible, but we'll look at it more in a second. And the main reason anyway, that it's particularly difficult is because you're spread over such a large but thin area. So the settlements are all far away from each other. It's sort of similar in a way to Scythia, which covers all this area, but the difference is Scythia hasn't got a load of factions surrounding it that could potentially attack. Whereas the Seleucids are definitely a lot more vulnerable to some very strong factions. But we'll discuss that in more detail in a second. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the units that are available in the Seleucid campaign. The description over here says powerful selection of phalanxes, heavy cataphract cavalry and elephants. And what I will say is the late Seleucid army particularly, but even to some extent the early Seleucid army is actually quite strong. It's a decent army. It's just their starting position is probably the most difficult in the game. But yeah, let's have a look at the units. Okay, so these are the Seleucid units, and it's a relatively diverse army, I'd argue. Maybe not so good on the old missile front, but particularly the heavy cavalry and the phalanx units, they're pretty good at some stages. So, first of all, peasants. These are really bad, even by peasant standards, by looks of things. 1 attack, 1 defense, and 1 charge with poor morale. Obviously, peasants aren't actually... they're not useful, really, in combat at all. They're more of a liability than anything. And you have militia hoplites. Now, these are hoplites, so they're decent against cavalry, which is, an aspect of pretty much all spearmen in the game. But as hoplites go, these are pretty much the worst. And the reason is they have a poor morale for a start, they haven't got a very good defense, and their attack just is very good. But if you need something desperately to cover the flanks, to protect yourself from a cavalry charge or whatever, militia hoplites will do a job to a certain extent, but they're not going to stand and fight for ages. So I wouldn't rely on these guys too much. They're only really a step up from town watch, I say, but they can form a phalanx, which is a good thing, I suppose. Next up, levy pikemen. These are a bit better, more soldiers in a unit, which is good in my opinion. The attack is basically the same, it's 1 better than the militia hoplites. The defense is 3 lower though, which is something to consider. Still poor morale, but a good thing is they have very long spears, which is not an aspect of the militia hoplites. The very long spears mean obviously they're further away from the enemy, and of course they have a bonus fighting cavalry. So they are a step up, but their defense is worse. Again, they're decent, but you don't want to get into a long fight. In the early game they should do a job, particularly against light or basic heavy cavalry. Next up, phalanx pikemen. Now this is a bit better. Their main improvement is of course their defense, which goes up by 8, and their attack is now 8 as well. Very long spears, which is similar to the previous pikemen we just looked at, but the main difference really, I suppose actually, is the fact that they don't have poor morale. Morale is such a huge thing in the game in my opinion, particularly for infantry units like these, heavy infantry units. So for such units to have not poor morale means that they are instantly better than these 2 units. So phalanx pikemen are pretty good, and of course they can form a phalanx, hence their name. Next up, silver shield pikemen. Good morale, so again, that makes them a step up from the phalanx pikemen immediately. Very long spears, which is an aspect of pretty much all the Seleucid pikemen. That's just what they are, they have long spears. A bit like some of the Macedonian ones as well. Attack of 10 is decent, defense of 14 is decent, but good stamina, good morale. They'll stand and fight for a while. These guys are good, and again, obviously they're particularly good against cavalry. They're long spears. It's going to take a very strong cavalry charge from multiple directions probably to take these guys out, just because they're good, that's what they're for. They're specialists in fighting cavalry, but of course they can hold the front line as well. I personally would probably just prefer legionaries to hold the front line. These are sort of more Roman-like troops, sort of remind me of the Principes or something like that, or the cohorts. This is later on in the game of course. They have a missile attack of 13, which again is similar to the Roman infantry units. Attack of 9 is a bit underwhelming, but the defense of 22 is solid. Coupled with good morale and very well armoured and good stamina, these guys will stand and fight for a while. I personally prefer them to pikemen in combat against other infantry, but that's probably just me. I would use these guys for if I was against a cavalry based army, but I personally prefer legionary type troops. I'm not a big fan of the phalanx out in the open field. In defending a city, though, of course, a silver shield pikeman would be better because they can clog up the streets. If there's a phalanx in a tight street, which you can't flank them around, it's going to be very difficult to get past the several units, especially the unit size is 121. That's going to be difficult with good morale as well. So these guys are better for defending cities. I would say the legionaries are better out in the open field. Probably their main difference is they're faster, if anything. Peltas, relatively basic. You've probably seen Peltas before. They're not that good in the melee attack or defense. Their missile attack's a bit underwhelming, but the good thing about them is they're very fast moving. They have good stamina and stuff like that. So, you know, they have a bonus against cavalry as well, I think. So, you know, they're skirmishers. They're okay. I would prefer archers. But again, their missile attack's a bit underwhelming, but they have a longer range. Obviously, they're archers. And again, they're not that good in the melee. That's not what archers are for. So, cavalry. Now, Greek cavalry is not that good. Really isn't that good. I believe it's light cavalry. It says, well, they have spears. But yeah, I think it's light cavalry. These guys are fast moving, of course. And basically what I would use them for is a similar purpose to the equites of the Roman armies. Just chasing down troops, chasing down routing troops. You don't want to get into a long fight against infantry or other cavalry with the Greek cavalry because they'll be inferior pretty much every time. That's just not what they're for. They're meant for chasing down troops. So yeah, they're okay basically in the early game, but their usefulness diminishes pretty quickly in my opinion. Next up, General's Bodyguard. Relatively self-explanatory. This is the pre-Marian General's Bodyguard. Pretty good stuff. Good morale, good stamina. 11 attack, 10 defense. Solid. Not the greatest bodyguard unit in the game. Obviously, they get improved by the post-Marian. Okay, so yeah, this is just the General's Bodyguard. Sorry. And then you have the Companion Cavalry. This is a better unit of cavalry. Let's be honest. 10 attack, 17 defense, good morale, very well armoured, powerful charge. The charge bonus of 9, of course, which means that their attack of 10, which is slightly underwhelming, goes up to 19 with the charge, so that's pretty good. And it says here, they're military elite, they're used as shock cavalry, so they're kind of like cataphracts, and to break enemy units. And that is, of course, what cataphracts are for. Particularly, they are shock troops, extremely heavily armoured shock cavalry. 7 attack, which is a bit underwhelming, but again, the charge bonus means that's actually pretty decent. Defense of 23, though, you're not taking these guys down easily. They will stand and fight, and they will break your units. So, Seleucid army is pretty strong in terms of cavalry. Not the Greek cavalry, but looking at it, it's actually a pretty solid army. You know, it does lack on the missile front, but do you really need missiles when you've got a strong selection of cavalry and heavy infantry? Possibly not, depends how you like to play the game. And of course you have got scythe chariots as well. These guys are a bit faster. I don't rate chariots personally, I don't like them. I can't control them that well, and they can just run amok. But the 15 attack's pretty good, and of course the defense of 1 is a weakness of all chariots. It means if you have a set of archers and they are firing against these chariots, they'll take them down pretty quickly, unless they've got some way to get away. The good thing is they have good morale, but they'll just go down so quickly. But again, they're sort of shock cavalry. They're just meant to charge into a unit, break them, and then break another unit. That's what they're for. They're not really there to stand and fight. Here we go. I was wondering where the post-Marian General's Bodyguard is. It's over here for some reason. Yeah, so basically the same attack, but a better defense. That's the main bonus, really, and they're very well armoured. So it's just a very similar version of this, but they're very well armoured, and they have a better defense, which is their purpose, I suppose. It means they're better. And of course, a great thing about the Seleucids are they have elephants that are available. Most factions don't. I think Carthage can and Numidia can. You'll have to check those faction guides to see. But yeah, I think it's pretty much only the African factions that can do it. Other factions have to hire them as mercenaries. So it's pretty cool that you can get your own elephants as the Seleucids. And now these elephants are the basic ones, but still pretty decent. An attack of 3, which isn't that great. Defense of 12, and again, this is more shock cavalry. The Seleucid cavalry is basically shock cavalry, which is pretty much the same for most of the Middle Eastern factions. The cataphracts is what that's what they're for. But anyway, the elephants pretty strong, but again, they can run amok. They can't hide, which is relatively obvious, I think. But yeah, they're good. They're just used to scare units, other cavalry, stuff like that. But you have the better war elephants, more numerous. Slightly better attack, double the attack actually. They've got a missile attack, which is quite nice. Better defense, more hit points. These guys are hard to take down, particularly with the good morale. So again, war elephants, just better all-round version. And then even better than that is armoured elephants. The same attack, same missile attack, but better defense, and they're even better armoured, which is quite impressive. 12 hit points, charge bonus of 8. These guys are going to be really difficult to take down. You don't want to fight them on the open field, or you don't want to fight them anyway, really. They can be quite annoying to fight against, but it takes quite a while to get to a stage where you can make armoured elephants, or produce them. And then finally, militia cavalry, similar to Numidian cavalry, if you've played as Numidia before. I quite like these guys. I prefer horse archers to horse or javelin cavalry, but still, decent job. They're fast moving. Canterbury Circle I don't think is that useful, but they're okay in the attack and defense. They're basically the same as Greek cavalry in that regard, pretty much. But of course, it's their missile attack, which is what they're there for. They're meant to tie down enemies, strike them down without being struck themselves. And in terms of siege equipment, it's literally just the onagers, but they should do a decent job. Maybe against sort of huge or epic stone walls, they'll struggle. You have to get a couple of onagers maybe, but I don't find siege equipment is that vital in the campaign for me personally. But onagers, they'll do a solid job for most of the campaign anyway. So next up, we'll have a look at the introduction video, the starting video for the campaign, and then I'll talk some strategy and have a look at the buildings with you.
The Greeks could rule the world. Alexander did. He took a Greek army to the far Indus. There was nothing left to conquer. The world was his. But Alexander is dead. His empire is gone. And so we live in evil days. The free men of Greece have turned on each other instead of their proper enemies, those who envy all the Greeks have done. Alexander must weep if the dead weep. I would weep in his place, but I would also hope. The world turns. What was may come again. The fates still spin the web of men's lives. So now, perhaps the gods wish Greeks to be great again. Perhaps a new Alexander will take up the sword. Bring order where there is chaos. Remake the world of men to a better plan. Perhaps.
Okay, so this is the starting position for the Seleucids, and as you can see once more, it's actually quite a few settlements, but spread out over a huge area, from Halicarnassus all the way over here. You have to travel a long way, carry on, all the way over here, all the way over to the capital. Over here is a long distance. It's, the whole distance of Asia Minor plus a section of the Middle East as well. So, it's not easy to move troops around, and even the distance from each settlement, Hatra to Seleucia, quite a big distance in between. Even a spy, good old Philip over here, takes a solid 2 or 3 turns to get over, and he's a spy, so he's got a lot of movement points. So that makes it very difficult. But first of all, what I want to say is I'm going to turn off the fog of war just for, purposes of showing you what's going on, so I can evaluate what's around us. I can't really do that with the fog of war on. I wouldn't normally play it with the fog of war off, of course. That's cheating in my opinion personally, but here we go. This is what it looks like, and what it does look like is a lot of strong, well, several strong factions that are actually near us. So we'll start off over here, and over here you have the Greeks. Yeah, we have the Greeks, we have the people of Pontus over here, we have the Armenians, we have the Parthians, and we have the Egyptians, all of which will attack you, pretty much. It's pretty much a given that certainly at some point the Pontus attacks relatively quickly. Greece normally takes a little while longer, mainly because they're either going for Nicomedia or they're pouring in troops to take Athens or fight over here. Greece is generally less aggressive. Armenia, very likely they'll come down and try and take Hatra, wherever that is, over here. they're less likely to go and attack the Seleucids. It's possible, but less likely. They're more likely to try and go and take Hatra. Parthians definitely will attack. They'll attack Seleucia, almost certainly. And they'll probably get Dumatha before you as well. And the Egyptians are very aggressive. Although they might go for Bostra and Petra and Palmyra first, they will almost certainly go for Damascus pretty quickly. So, in conclusion, really, there are at least 4 factions, probably 5 if you include Greece, that are very likely to attack you. So, there's several ways of playing it, but one way I would not recommend is playing defensive, which might sound odd because you have to kind of play defensive, you'd argue, as there's so many people attacking you. The problem is, if you play defensive, first of all, your economy won't grow that quickly, but it's impossible. It's impossible to keep all these settlements without expanding, because eventually so many people will attack you. You're going to lose one, and then as soon as you lose one, you're going to try and reinforce that, and then the other settlement will get taken, and it'll get a snowball effect where you realise 4 or 5 settlements have been taken off you. You have to pick your target and go aggressive. Now, diplomacy is quite important. I would try and ally with one of these 3, Pontus, Armenia or Parthia. I wouldn't try and ally with all 3 because first of all it's probably impossible, and second of all there's no point. Let's say you allied with Armenia and Parthia, then as soon as, let's say, one attacks the other alliance is going to be broken down anyway, so you might as well just focus on one. I would probably say I wouldn't get an alliance with Parthia just because it's inevitable they're going to attack you. They have nowhere to expand but attack you, pretty much. So I wouldn't bother because they're going to attack you regardless. I would say Armenia or Pontus. Probably I would say Armenia because they have less places to expand. They really have to go south. Whereas Pontus they probably will focus on maybe Nicomedia or Ancyra or the Greeks before you. So ally with Armenia is what I would try and do. Now you have to pick your target. You can't try and engage in war with Pontus, Armenia and Parthia all at once. It's not going to work. So what would I do? I'd go and focus on the toughest enemy, which of course is Egypt. Now, first of all, don't bother taking Bostra and Petra. They can wait. Try and just take out Egypt as much as possible. I'd focus a lot of your resources, not all, because you still need to garrison settlements like Seleucia and Hatra. But, for example, Sidon here, it's only got 4 garrison. You've got a couple of settlements around here you could pour into getting the Sidon. Jerusalem has a decent garrison of 5, but you've got to try and take these settlements. More importantly, really, you could get a boat and try and take Alexandria, Memphis, and Thapsus. Now, Thebes. They're better defended, but by the time you get over, hopefully, these armies would have started moving towards Bostra, Petra, maybe towards the Numidians, less likely though, and they'll be relatively less defended. And the reason you want to take Memphis first, pretty much always when you attack Egypt, for whatever reason, is of course they have the pyramids of Giza, which, if you have a look at the bonus, increase the loyalty of Egyptian settlements. So if you take Sidon, Jerusalem, Salamis, Alexandria, you're going to struggle to keep them because they're all going to be in the red with population disloyalty. But if you take Memphis first, then you don't have to worry about garrisoning these settlements quite as much. So focus on Egypt. It's difficult, but there's several reasons why Egypt. They're going to expand quickly, they're going to attack you quickly, and if they are allowed to technologically and economically and military improve, they're going to be way too strong. It's one of the hardest factions, in my opinion, in the whole game to fight against, probably other than the Romans. They spam units like hell, they're very militaristic, they're very aggressive. You don't want to be getting into a war later on with the Egyptians, because if they get big enough and strong enough, they'll dominate you. Doesn't matter how much you've conquered, Egyptians are very, very strong. So that's the faction I'd go for first. Once you've taken them out, then you can sort of pick your next enemy depending on what's going on. Probably the Parthians. They would have attacked you at some point anyway. So, yeah, it's difficult to offer advice for Seleucids, but don't play it too defensively. It's very tempting to. You're just going to get dogpiled. You need to choose your enemy. I would choose Egypt. Now, finally, we're going to have a look at the buildings that are available. So, I'll do that very quickly. Let's have a look at the building browser. Okay. Walls, relatively similar to most Middle Eastern factions. They go up the way to epic stone walls, barracks, stables, rangers, traders. We've seen a lot of this stuff before, so I won't really go through it. And then you have the temples. 3 different types of temples: Hephaestus, Dionysus, and Asclepius. So, we'll have a look at the basic level temple first, and we'll see what they can get up to at the Pantheon at the end. So, Hephaestus. light weapons and bonus at the beginning. Dionysus is just happiness. Asclepius, happiness and health. At the top level, so a Pantheon to Hephaestus, is of course, you can imagine, weapons and armour improvement. The public order bonus due to happiness is 25%, it's pretty good. Upgrade light, heavy and weapons +1. Upgrade armour +1, so pretty solid all round, but +2 experience bonus is really good. So that's a pretty damn strong Pantheon. And another public order bonus as well. So Hephaestus is definitely one I'd recommend if you've got a very military-minded settlement. You're going to be recruiting a lot from it. The Pantheon to Dionysus is mainly happiness bonus, you can probably imagine, with a bit of population growth bonus. Probably that alcohol helped a little bit with that, I don't know. 60% bonus of public order, essentially. And yeah, gets the population up a little bit as well. So that's pretty good. And then the Pantheon to Asclepius is, again, a happiness 50%, increase in tradable goods. That's going to help the economy and growth, and a +2 experience. So more of an all-round one, Asclepius is. Asclepius is all-round. Dionysus is happiness and public order, and Hephaestus, as you can probably imagine, is to do with military and weapons. And that's pretty much it. That's all I've really got to say for the Seleucids. It's a difficult campaign in my opinion. At the beginning, it's most difficult. In my opinion, it's more difficult than the Numidians. The only reason it's not as difficult later on in the game is because they actually have some quite strong units, as I sort of alluded to earlier. So, you know, it's a strong army, it's a good army, it's their starting position is just horrible. But very fun. It's a fun campaign to play. So that's pretty much it for my Seleucid faction guide for Rome Total War, and I'll be back very, very soon with more Scythia campaign, Mercenary Challenge, and some more faction guides. Plus, I've got plans for a new Medieval 2 Total War series. It's a modded Medieval 2 Total War, which I've wanted to play for a while, so that'll probably come around Christmas time, hopefully. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.